Hello, everybody. This is Stu Smith and Jeff Nichols doing a tactical fitness report. And today's it's a new one that we're doing. We're going to talk about Bortac. And if you're not familiar with what Bortac is, it's actually the Border Patrol tactical group. And it's kind of like their SWAT group. But they're really focused now. They've kind of evolved over the years, and they're really focused now on more anti-terrorism.
Yep.
And they're not just Border Patrol guys. I mean, they have been operating in – did some reading today that they actually operated in 28 countries already, doing
I will say
cool stuff.
And I mean this not just because we're doing it, but having worked with FBI, HRT, Department of Energy, trained them for years, and then seeing what Bortac is doing. If I wanted to go back in the tactical space, I probably would do Bortac.
Yeah.
Not that their funding is exceptional, but it's pretty good. And then the people, and having talked, and it kind of more segued a little bit. So Stu and I, ironically enough, when I was visiting Stu in Annapolis, one of the schoolhouse, I guess we'll call them like team leaders, if you will.
Yeah, instructors.
Yeah,
Bortac instructors, yeah.
Reached out to Stu because they were having there was a reoccurring theme of some of their candidates getting rhabdo. And, having a really good conversation, I've had some experience over the years with some of my athletes getting rhabdo. And a lot of times it's interesting. It's very counterintuitive with rhabdo is that we think that people typically out of shape get rhabdo, but really it's you have someone that has a lot of muscle mass that can produce a tremendous amount of force, end up getting it.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's kind of the genesis of this because, Stu and I had a really great conversation with him, been in correspondence via email with him to help those guys hopefully better prepare, for lack of a better term, some of their candidates from getting rhabdo and some other overuse injuries because these guys, men and women, work their butts off.
Oh, man. Yeah, Bortac is a tough school. I mean, they basically are borderline Hell Week material, going through their training. Yeah, Bud's Hell Week.
From what I've seen of their curriculum, aside, am I biased a little bit being a former SEAL and going through Bud's? Maybe a little bit, but objectively, Bortac, it's up there. I mean, it's got to be top 2 or 3.
Oh, absolutely.
As far as difficulty.
It's definitely tough. Well, let's do this, Jeff. I know we've called it rhabdo. Let's call it what it really is. It's called rhabdomyolysis.
Yep.
Right? And it is an ailment that occurs in really 2 different types of people. One, very deconditioned people who overwork themselves.
Yeah, they thrust themselves in an acute training environment where it's very intense and severe.
Right. Sometimes,
time.
A lot of times you will see it at Army boot camp where people say, I'll let boot camp get me in shape. And that's one, that's a really bad idea. 2, you might even have seen it or heard about its, I guess, popularity increase through CrossFit because that happens as well.
Their mascot early on was Rhabdo the Clown, right?
Yeah, that's messed up. But
and we're not picking on CrossFit, but it's just one of those things because CrossFit is very intense. And so as in conjunction with that level of intensity, it happens. Okay?
Yes.
It happens everywhere. It's not a CrossFit thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the butt. So it can happen.
I've seen it happen long before there was a CrossFit.
Yep.
It happened. Yeah. So
it happens a lot in Division I athletics, Division II athletics for offensive and defensive linemen, big dudes.
Yep.
Because this happened at Iowa, the University of Iowa, after a bowl game loss, the head strength coach Doyle put the boots to the team in a parking lot, and I was sitting in the winter.
Wow.
And a bunch of the offensive linemen were rushed to the hospital.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they were in good shape for offensive line, but you have these big guys with a lot of muscle mass, a lot of stress, doing a lot of high intense work. And so let's do this, Stu. And so we can people are going, keep saying rhabdomyolysis. What the hell?
Right.
So let's define physiologically what it is. Let's go with that.
Go with
it. So rhabdo. So I like to use an analogy, and I say, okay, you put your key in your vehicle, you turn the car on, combustion engine, There's a burning of that fossil fuel, and out the muffler, the exhaust comes carbon monoxide. It's a byproduct. It's a negative byproduct of burning fossil fuels. So your blood, your tissue, all these sort of things, when you work out intensely or moderately even, there's a byproduct to muscle being damaged microscopically. And that byproduct is two things. It's blood lactate, which we typically call lactic acid, which we're splitting hairs there. Your blood becomes acidic. You have blood lactate that's released. We just shorten it to lactic acid. So that's a byproduct. But the damaging byproduct, if it's not filtered out, is creatine kinase. Now, this is not creatine monohydrate. Taking creatine monohydrate does not increase your chances of rhabdomyolysis. So your liver filters that out. But when you have a lot of muscle mass, it's got to be a perfect storm, because there's typically got to be dehydration involved.
Yep.
There's got to be a poor diet. There's got to be previous stress. There's got to be previous physical activity that was tough to begin with,
that you haven't fully recovered from.
For sure. And sometimes, like in the last case that I encountered, he was on a small dose of blood pressure medication, which is a diuretic, which then leads to, right? So it's not just hard work rhabdo. It's usually this combination of things. So basically, your liver can't filter out that creatine kinase at the rate that damage has occurred. So it's basically becomes a clogged drain. Then go back to the lactate, right? Your blood becomes super acidic because it can't filter, and the creatine kinase is backed up in your bloodstream, and it starts coagulating. So you go into renal failure.
Yeah.
Die.
Yeah,
So,
it's very serious. And some
serious.
of the symptoms that you will see is severely pained muscles.
Yeah, you start getting muscle paralysis. You're like, man, I can't move my arm.
Yeah.
And you might get paralysis of a side of a face, or that you get drop foot. You can't lift your toe. You start getting dizzy and confused, hard to focus, slurred speech. That hopefully before that you've called 911.
Yeah, bilateral muscle pain.
Yes, real severe. Like if anyone's had food poisoning, you get that really severe stomach cramping. You get that severe cramping in the muscles.
Yes.
And it may not be acute. Like if you really kicked your ass in leg work, you might not just get cramping in legs. It might be elsewhere in your hands, your toes, your biceps. You don't know where you're going to cramp.
Yeah.
So,
and sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
And if you're peeing brown.
Bad idea. Yeah, bad.
Yeah,
really dark.
Really dark pee.
Like Guinness. If it looks like Guinness,
just
get your ass to the hospital.
Yeah, 911.
Yeah.
Call it.
Or you see this in triathletes where it's actually thick like syrup. It's coagulated and it's brown, and that's bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other side is that because most time it's caught pretty regularly, because these happened in sporting events and they're typically supervised, which is also why we're saying, hey, if you're going to train really hard, train with a buddy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you go to the hospital, they're going to jam you full of fluids. They're going to jam you full of anticoagulants, and they are going to just start really forcing hydration through IV, and they're going to monitor your creatine kinase levels until they drop to a normal level.
Yeah.
And typically, almost in every case, when you encounter rhabdo, you get to a hospital in time, there's not really any residual effects other than for the next couple of days, you need to stay away from physical activity and let your body go, whew, that was close. Okay. But typically you don't have like with heat exhaustion, for example, which is also a good transition, which happens a lot for the Bortac guys and men and women. You're not more susceptible to rhabdo if you've had it. You just need to give yourself some time away from physical training.
Yeah. And this is also good for you guys that are, other special ops groups too, because Bud's guys get rhabdo as well.
Yep.
So, but with the Bortac, typically, like I said, I was talking about the two type of people that typically get this, or people who are deconditioned, big or small, and they just go into an acute training program that's over their, level of preparation, and guys that are big. typically big muscle mass guys
Yep.
who, even though they're in great shape,
Yeah.
may get this. So
like I would say probably Stu and I are at a greater risk of getting rhabdo, even though we have a good cardiac and aerobic and anaerobic base. Let's say if Stu and I decided like at a whim, like, hey man, let's go do this go ruck event. There is a real chance if we don't stay really hydrated, even if we're in great shape. I don't want to scare anybody. That's not the idea.
Right.
So
right.
Stu, let's do this instead of going down that road.
Yeah.
Let's have you talk about kind of the genesis of our conversation that we had with the schoolhouse and what they were encountering with the combination of distance and ruck weight and heat and such.
Right. Yeah. Bortac, I think their training is in, I think they're out of Fort Bliss.
Fort Bliss.
Correct?
And then sometimes there's a port. Yeah. They're out of Fort Bliss. And then they transfer to like it.
In
Part
New
of their
Mexico.
training might be offsite in New Mexico. Right.
Yeah. They do a couple different training programs from what I understand, or locations throughout their phases. But anyway, regardless, summer, hot as hell in arid environments.
Yep.
And the problem with arid environments is you don't even know you're sweating.
Yeah.
Because you will sweat and it will immediately evaporate. Now, the only way you will know that is you see salt stains on your clothes.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's another indicator that, you need to make sure you're getting not only water to hydrate yourself, but the electrolytes too, because that's the other segment of this too. Water and electrolytes are big. If you can keep those up, your chances of getting rhabdo are lower. So
Correct.
Hydration and electrolytes, big key for this. And part of their problem is their first couple of weeks of their training is like a bud selection, pretty much. But
serious kick in the butt.
Yeah, I would say it's a combo of buds and SF training, because they're carrying rucks with them all day, and between them and another person, they got to carry an extra 50 to 100 pounds of gear. So each one's probably over 100 pounds worth of stuff that they're carrying.
Yeah, and I think that if I'm mistaken, it was the weight that you specified in up to 80 miles that week, correct?
Yeah, 80 to 100 miles.
I don't know any, and I mean this. Now, you will accumulate that mileage and budge on a week, but not with an 80 or 100-pound ruck. You don't even do that on the long walk with Delta selection. You don't do that much distance with SF. You don't do that much distance with MARSOC either. So this is a real amazing, beautiful, I love it, challenge.
It is hardcore.
Yeah.
It is hardcore. So and they have a pretty decent attrition rate too, which causes them to have to do more classes and get more people in there. Yeah. Which is hard to do, because not a Border Patrol agents want to do this. I mean, there are some that do, but they don't get a massive amount of numbers to do this. But to do this, you have to be a Border Patrol agent for 2 years before you can even apply for Bortac.
Stu, correct me if I'm wrong, the genesis of the Bortac, and I think he said this when we talked to him, basically like the origin of it, because it hasn't been around that long. It was basically
80s.
It was basically taking a look at SF selection and mirroring that pipeline, just like you had just mentioned. So these guys didn't reinvent the wheel, but they really created a program and curriculum very specific to the needs of the Border Patrol to do the job that they do. And their job is pretty interesting as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah. And especially since post 9/11, it has really evolved into more of a, anti-terrorist than,
for sure,
finding illegal immigrants that are criminals and drug dealers and, things like that.
These guys have a specific target deck, as you would in the military SF space. And they are executing as in do, not as in people.
Yeah.
specific missions within their scope of expertise. So it's really, I really am fascinated. And I'm mostly fascinated because they are protecting this country, not from illegal aliens from Mexico. I don't have an issue with that, but I'm just like the drug cartels specifically. And that is a group that you really need to be careful with.
Oh, absolutely. That, and, the threat of, like I said, they've been operating in 28 different countries.
Yeah.
So they're going after people. as well. So, and it's like I said, they're a tough group. I'm not sure where they rank on the tier level. If they're considered a tier 1, tier 2 level, but it sounds like what they're doing, with their high risk warrants that they have to do, it is up there.
Yeah, they're falling in a non-DoD federal entity, probably similar to Homeland Security
or HRT even,
and FBI.
Yeah.
Probably very similar jurisdictional sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's go into, so Stu and I had this conversation, and Stu's followed on with the gentleman. And so now we've presented you all and them, like as they presented us, hey guys, here's our issue.
Right.
So Stu, how about you jump in to say, okay,
so
what steps do we need to go forward on?
Yeah. So I basically had a few recommendations. A few of my recommendations were, making sure that there is a pre-training program. And I know you kind of leave this up to the student, but the student needs to know, look, you're going to be tasked with, 100 miles of rucking in a week in a short period of time. Not that I think you need to practice 100 miles of rucking in a week to be prepared for that, but your training program needs to be solid enough to where you can have that strength to endure that. You got the endurance to endure that, and you have progressed in your running and rucking programming to be able to handle that.
Yes.
And that takes time. It may take a year. It may take that long, depending on, what job you've been doing for 2 years as a Border Patrol agent. You may not have a lot of time to train, and it's going to take time to train if you want to make this sufficient. And I think one of the keys I said is that, it's not a bad idea to do a couple of gut checks, throughout your training program, but, something 24 to even 48 weeks worth of strength and endurance training, will help your students be able to endure this program. Like they can't just go on a 6-week program and say, all right, I'm ready to go.
Good. Yeah. And there's a lot of depends there. So so we're super clear as far as what Stu and I were educated on is, right, these individuals don't, it's like, we'll just use buds as an example because that's what I most clearly understand is now there's like that 6, 8, 10, 12 pre-buds to prepare them after all these sort of things. Bortac is like, hey, the message board goes out and get, hey, the Bortac class is coming up on this date, in advance. Where's my applicants? Those applicants come in and they go, all right, be here on this date. There's this very informal sort of, because they're already Border Patrol working full hours each day.
Yeah. So
there isn't this there isn't this pre-Bortac training because they're on their job. Maybe a week later, they're in Bortac selection. So what Stu and I were saying is like, okay, well, if we can help them create a curriculum that once someone has identified themselves as candidates, because it's big boy rules, that goes out to those candidates and go, hey, it is in your best interest to follow this 6-month training program to help prepare you for the stressors that are going to be placed upon you.
Yeah. This is more of an administrative recommendation we made, but like if you send out a message saying, hey, in 2 months, our next Border Patrol class is going, right? Yeah. 2 months may not be enough time if that person hasn't been training for the previous 8 months, waiting for this 2 months to come.
Correct.
Something to do is maybe say, you know what? However, in 8 months from now, our next class will open.
Yep.
So that will give somebody, some time to better prepare for that, that next class.
For sure.
So that once again, and it's still our, regular advice to you guys is you gotta be better prepared for these hardcore training programs. And just because you're 18 years old and can join the Navy or can join the military, doesn't mean you are ready.
Yes.
And the same thing kind of holds for these guys too. I think the main reason a lot of these guys are failing in getting Rhabdo is they're just not ready for that amount of time. They weren't given enough time to prepare.
Right. And the conversation we had with him, and again, it falls right in line with what we've talked about. The guys that are getting rhabdo are the best, quote unquote, his words, are the best candidates. The ones that are the biggest, fastest, strongest ones, the ones who can produce the most force. That's what I mean. It's very counterintuitive, because you're thinking, well, the guy that's coming in out of shape is going to get it. But they're not actually damaging their muscle as much, because you got a guy that's capable. He's like, these guys were former linebackers, former wrestlers, like from big schools, Division I schools. And they put these rucksacks on and they're just boom, charging. Yes. And then before you know it, they're down hard. And they're like, what happened? You're our best athlete. You're like, because they have the engine. They have this huge engine that can just go, and they're used to being uncomfortable. So it's very strange, because you're like, we all think, man, these guys must really be out of shape. No, it's just, and that's why, okay, so here's kind of where maybe it might sound contradictory, because I always say, hey, don't put miles in, don't put miles because it's not necessary. But when you're enduring that much load, you have to have a good aerobic base.
Yeah, that is the number one key to this.
You have to have that solid aerobic base to support that strength endurance, to filter out those necessary byproducts. So it's kind of one of those things, and that's why we're saying when you're encountering that much heat, load, and distance, 2 months very likely is not optimal. We want to get it out there 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 months.
Yeah. And you want to be able to do a progression where you don't have to run and ruck every day. You want a long enough progression spread out over several months to where you only need to ruck a couple days a week, and then you can run a couple days a week, and then you can spend another 2 or 3 days that week doing non-impact cardio.
Yes.
Just to rest your joints, because you're going to just break yourself if you try to play catch up 7 days a week, doing a lot of running and rucking. So.
Right. You want to put in the aerobic work on just what Stu is saying, with maybe not having loading your spine. Yeah. So maybe we switch to, for example, maybe sled pushes and pulls, right? Yeah. You might want to do some pool work. Yeah. You may want to just really get it like an assault bike. And I mean, I'm talking attack that assault bike.
Yeah. Go hardcore on the bikes.
Versa climber, right? Jacob's ladder. Some of those things where it can kick you in the butt, but it's not quite putting that load on you.
Right. Oh, in fact, there are swimming requirements for Bortac as well. Yeah. So run, swim, ruck, the perfect, what we call the SpecOps triathlon, is a great way to prepare for, a Bortac program. Plus, it gives you that non-impact option, of cardio as well.
For sure. So again, we're in correspondence with the folks there at the schoolhouse, and they had some meetings that they're gonna hopefully communicate back to us and see, because again, for us, I just want to learn. I'm not entitled to anything. We're not, but just being able to understand kind of what they're doing, so we can better give them advice and the rest of you. So it's a pretty interesting group, and you don't hear about it much.
Yeah.
But it certainly falls on the radar of like highly skilled individuals.
Well, let's do this. Oh, absolutely. They're studs. Let's do this. Let's close this with all the ways that we can think of to help prevent rhabdo.
Okay. Yep. So number one, in my opinion, maybe not overall, but probably your best bet is adequate or better than adequate hydration.
Yes. And electrolytes.
What is that? Okay, so people say, what does that mean?
Right.
Okay. Generally speaking, if you weigh 200 pounds, drink 2 gallons of water that day over 24, maybe 1.5 gallons, especially in that hot, in that hot environment, 2 gallons plus electrolytes.
Yeah.
Just crush it. Crush the fluid. You know what I mean? You're not going to you won't over drink water. You're not going to be susceptible to, what's the word here?
Hyponatremia.
Hyponatremia in that environment, unless
you're not taking any electrolytes.
Boom. Yep.
Yeah. So that'll kill you.
It certainly will. And you don't need a lot, right? But make sure that's a part of it. So what about you? What's the next one, Stu?
Yeah, that's a real good one. In fact, one of the kind of an easy thing to remember about hydration is how many pounds you are. That's how many ounces of water you need.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
and
you know,
especially
roughly.
when you're
Yeah.
doing the training on that too. The only reason why I have a scale is for two reasons. It's to check my state of hydration,
Yep.
pre and post training, just like they do in a lot of sports, but also post illness. If you've had the flu or something, weigh yourself.
Yeah.
If you dropped a bunch of weight because you've had the flu and haven't eaten and dehydrated, you need to get that back in your body before you go back to physical activity.
Ooh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's the big one. You know, weigh yourself.
Yeah. So hydration, that's a good way to check your hydration is just weighing yourself. Cause I mean, I go to work out in the morning, you know, weighing 215. I come back sometimes at 209. You know, you lose 6 pounds of water
For sure.
You know, pretty easy. So,
yeah, I would say maybe the next one for me in that environment, and this is something we encouraged him to look into, I would strongly urge you to look into 2xU compression socks.
yes.
And or tights, specifically socks though.
Yeah.
That is going to help mitigate rhabdo for sure, but also it'll improve hydration. It'll improve temperature management, right? Help your thermostat not overheat. Believe it or not, again, you know, the scary thing is like, oh, I don't want to wear tights, it's going to make me hot. If you're wearing tights and they're making you hot, they're not a compression garment. It's
right.
a layer.
Yeah.
If you have real compression garments on, you will feel like this sense of cooling. You won't overheat.
Yeah.
It'll do the opposite because you've improved circulation. Okay. So that's what I would say. Look at a really good compression garment. And the only three that I would ever use are 2xU, CP, and then the TED stocking, which aren't comfortable, but they are. They are what they are. So that I would say compression garment. That's my next thing.
Nutrition. Don't skip any meals. You definitely need to be well fed and well carbed, well energized for these type of events, because you're probably going to be able to eat every 6 hours typically. You know, if you're going a week long pretty hardcore, you know, they're even probably going to give you a fourth meal in the day.
Don't overlook fat.
Yeah.
Hot environments, you want fat.
Yeah. And especially, you know, you're going to be mostly aerobic in a lot of this event, but it's just, you know, so a nice high caloric, you know, food intake, getting some good fats in there. And especially if it's, you know, a lot of these times, here's the problem with desert. A lot of times you're hot as hell in the day, but you're cold at night.
Yep.
You know, and that's a hard on the body, and you're going to be burning a lot of calories just to try to stay warm, and burning a lot of calories just trying to stay cool too. You know, so, you know, that's where all the extra food needs to come in.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to eat.
We didn't ask them this, but, and I know it all depends on the branch of service and what you're doing, but especially if and when you're training for this, get really good footwear. Like you may have some really crappy military issued boots you have to wear when you actually do the test, but it's the same idea as like, you don't necessarily need to be running in baits prepping for buds. Maybe get a pair and experience and see how it works and kind of work on them a little bit. But just like if you want to put a lot of miles in running, get good running shoes. If you're going to have to be rucking quite a bit and training quite a bit, don't overlook footwear. Get some good, stable, neutral footwear. Okay.
Yeah. And ankle support. You know, it does help to have boots for that. I probably sprained each one of my ankles 10 or 12 times each playing rugby and football growing up. And then I never sprained my ankle again once I started wearing combat boots at Bud's.
Yeah.
You know, it's big help. So
don't train for the event in a backpack. Get a real rucksack with a carbon hard plastic or metal frame. Okay.
Yeah. And learn how to tweak your backpacks too.
Yeah.
That's another big one too. Just because, I mean, it's great. I love to do these things now with weight vests on, just because they're a lot more comfortable than wearing a backpack.
For sure.
But if you're about to endure a training program where you're wearing a backpack, guess what? You know, you need to know how to tweak a backpack and get your waist right, get the shoulder pads right, you know, everything fitting, and, you know, give it the old bounce test that it's not jingling and making a lot of noise. You know, all those things matter.
For
and
sure.
it takes time to practice some of those things. Now, obviously, this isn't going to, help you with rhabdo prevention, but these are just some other tips because we pretty much hit the majority of the things with rhabdo prevention: your electrolytes, your hydration, your nutrition, compression socks, and just a nice progressive training program that
Yes.
you basically, if you do a nice progressive aerobic training program, you could go do a marathon and not be crazy sore the next week.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, I don't want to say go do marathon training to prepare for this, because there's more to it than that, obviously, with all the load bearing.
Yep.
But you should be able to handle some of those long walks, and you got to put in the time. You got to put in the time with a backpack on. With it may mean one day you're going to wake up at 4 a.m. and come back home at noon.
Yep.
Doing an 8-hour ruck.
Yeah, and that's also too, and it's nothing against the program of Go Ruck, like the event. Now, the official Go Ruck event in their backpack is a backpack, not a ruck, number one.
Right.
And two, that from what I understand, many of those 24-hour Go Rucks, they take your food from you. And so it's kind of like, that's the test. That's not the train. So that's, someone asked me the other day, is like, hey, should I go do a Go Ruck event? Because I'm planning to do SF. And I'm like, and the same reason why I would say, should you be training for a triathlon when you're trying to get to SF program? No, because the triathlon is the test. You need to be training for that. Go Ruck is the test. You need to be training for that. And they don't sit in the same hemispheres.
Yeah.
They're, so it's now again, but if it's like, that's what your passion is, fine. But again, what we're trying to do is talk about optimization and for this. And so I guess my last piece is that sleep. Now, training for these events can be a little bit stressful for your nervous system. Cortisol is going to come up and all these sort of things. And so it's like, it's a little more complex than saying, make sure you get some sleep, but that's what I'm saying. Make sure you get plenty of sleep.
Yeah.
So that should be a focus. We were talking about hydration, caloric intake, sleep, compression. What I missed that proper, get a good ruck, all those sort of things. Keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And put in the time.
Yep, good progression. Put good progressive program over adequate time.
Yeah.
6 weeks, probably not so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
because like I said, your work capacity has to improve so you can handle 80 to 100 miles of moving in a week.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Now, I don't recommend doing 80 to 100 miles as a gut check prior to it, because unfortunately you probably won't recover from that in time for it to be helpful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's one of those gut check things that, you can do one if you really want to, but you're probably going to need You're probably going to need 6 months before you go to the Bortac training program before you're fully recovered from that kind of a butt kicking.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's just be mindful of all those sort of things, folks, and.
And look at a marathon program too, because there's no marathon program that has you running a full marathon prior to it.
Typically, typically the good ones will tap out at 18.
Yeah.
But if you already are a marathoner, you don't need to do that. You've already got the capacity. And like my sister, for example, I think she just did she had a full Ironman again, her 4th full Ironman, but she's done 19 marathons. And her, from the last half a dozen marathons, she never did more than I think 9 miles or something like that, maybe a 12 miler.
Yep.
She's got the capacity, and that's the thing is that at that point you just, especially like in the fight world, the marathon world, typically people they don't know any better, and that's okay. They just tend to overtrain.
Yes.
So we want you to train. But so if we give you enough time for Bortac, we have that time to just get this really good stair-step progressive training. It doesn't feel like, oh, I need to get there and get there fast.
Yeah. And think about this too. I mean, like your sister, who can, prepare for a marathon with only 10 miles of of a longest run, how long did that take her to be able to
Years.
do?
Yep.
That's years of progressing through doing them and preparing for them and being able to have that kind of capability. So just because some world-class marathoner or athlete is doing it this way does not mean it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
So
because you're going to throw in a combination of things in there, even for Bortac, and I would suggest it. I mean, if you have the capacity, spend 2 hours on a road bike. Okay.
Yeah.
Spend
absolutely.
2 hours in a paddle board. Spend 2 hours in a kayak. Spend 2 hours doing rock climbing. Like, we still want you to put the work in.
Yeah.
If we can kind of offload the physical stresses in terms of linear loading of those bones.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yes. I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
The only thing that's going to the side effect of diverse training is better performance.
Yeah. And you know what? If you're having a long, hard day at being a Border Patrol agent, that's a great time, right, to add on a little something else. If you've been on your feet all day, you've been rucking all day, you've been carrying your backpack, being a regular Border Patrol agent, you don't need to go put on another backpack and go do something for another 4 hours. That's when you get on the non-impact machines and, do another couple hours worth of training, just to expand your work capability and work capacity.
Very good.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've highlighted Bortac and kind of what we've learned also just on the training side. Again, Stu's already said it. It's this conversation spills beyond just Bortac, but in training in general. But this is definitely a group worth looking into, especially if you want to serve our country.
Yeah.
In a certain capacity, maybe not the military. You have your sights set on FBI or DOE, Department of Energy. This would be one that I certainly would look into.
Oh, absolutely.
So now the also weighted time in our podcast here is the stupid questions. So
yeah, we have those again.
You want to lead off with this one?
Yeah. By the way, we started a new series, if you haven't caught it yet, called the Recruiter Problems. And we were thinking at one point just saying, let's do a good question, let's do a bad question. And so one of the good questions was this recruiter question, which you know what? That one deserves its own podcast. So we just started up a new podcast series called Recruiter Problems. And you'll see them numbered, number 1, number 2, number 3. We just did number 1, and it's posted up there previous to this one. So check that one out. Now, we always still get stupid questions. And, not that I think they're stupid questions. They're just probably not just thought out very well before you ask them. Yep. I'm not even going to talk about the poor grammar questions we get.
That's a different podcast altogether.
Different day. But, the one that I received this week was, how many push-ups do you recommend for me to do every night? Now,
all of them.
Yeah. Well, yes, but I'm not a fan of daily anything. If you're going to do something daily, swimming is a great sport to do every day. Running, not every day, even several days a week. But when you're doing resistance training, your body needs to recover. Push-up is a resistance exercise. Yes, you've seen many push-ups every day programs. Herschel Walker's famous for 1,000 push-ups every day, but he is a freak of nature, right? And a world-class athlete. My guess is probably most of us are not that are trying for these jobs. Otherwise, you'd be going for the NFL.
Yeah.
Right. So, the high volume of push-ups is not recommended every day. I would recommend them 3 days a week, every other day max. Yep. And even then, like some days we'll do a Monday, Wednesday hard, upper body day, maybe a pyramid, maybe a lot of repetitions, get a lot of volume in there, and then take Thursday, Friday off, and then hit another hard one on Saturday. So you get a couple more days. And a lot of times that extra day on Saturday makes your scores just so much better on on Saturday. So you get even more than 48 hours off in between them. So, the kind of volume I guess I'm talking about is, some people, will say you don't need to do that much volume. And yeah, it's probably true. You probably don't. But I found that, a high volume in push-ups and pull-ups and core work, just really help my work capacity going through that training program, whether it's SEALs or whatever. And I like to do them. I like to do workouts where I'm doing 100, 150 pull-ups and 200 to 300, maybe even more push-ups and, as many sit-ups and flutter kicks and, plank poses and all those things. I think, like I said, I just enjoy doing it. I like the pump that I get from it. But I don't do them every day after day after day, because one of the other questions we get is, hey, I've been doing 500 push-ups a day and 500 or 200 pull-ups a day, and I'm not getting any better. In fact, I'm getting worse. Yep. And that's why you've been doing it for too long. You might see some good results for a month of that kind of activity, but after a couple of months, it's just going to go downhill big time. So, sure. And like I said, this really isn't a stupid question. Unfortunately, it's a very common question given by
simple short answer, and it's not.
Yeah, and it's usually asked by people who are just getting into the program and think, yeah, I lift weights every other day. I don't do bench press 5 days a week, right? But I can do push-ups 5 days a week. They think that's the same. It's not. The kind of volume you're getting requires another day off. Now, if you're like my dad, who's in his 70s and he does 10 push-ups in the morning every day, completely different.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing.
For sure. Yeah. So that's just the summary of kind of, we got to educate. You guys got to educate yourself, realize that the push-up is an exercise working particular muscle groups, and those muscle groups need rest.
Yeah. And very rarely have I ever seen anybody get kicked out of buds for failing push-ups.
Yeah.
I mean, push-ups suck, and you're going to do them every day at buds.
Yeah, a lot of them.
They're a punishment exercise. And just be prepared for hundreds of them. But that doesn't mean you need to do hundreds of them now to prepare for that.
Yep.
Every day.
Yep. So I think, and kind of wrap this thing up a little bit, is so we've picked Bortac. I think what we're going to do is we're going to pick other federal agencies to start talking about, whether it's FBI, Department of Energy. Maybe we talk about a general SWAT preparation, right?
Yep.
So Stu and I we'll get our heads together and come up with the topic. We'll start pushing those out, but we're going to continue to push out common good questions on how to approach recruiting to the best of our knowledge. And that's kind of a separate series altogether, but I think that you guys will get some use out of both.
Yeah, I like it.
Sounds good, Stu. I appreciate it.
All right, Jeff, we'll see you.
Take care.